Hungarian Folk Tales. Wooden Peter. Once there lived a farmer and his wife. Now these good people didn't have any children, and so one day the farmer said to his wife, "I'm going off into the forest to carve as a child out of wood." Now his wife laughed at this, but the farmer bundled up his stuff and set off into the forest. There he met some wood carvers. "God blessings on you this day. I came to get a small piece of wood." So they chopped him a piece of wood and he started to carve himself a child. It was evening when he returned home, and his wife laughed when she saw he'd brought home a wooden child. They had their supper and there was a little left over. "Now that's just enough for our son." Off they went to bed, and around midnight the boy called out, "Well, mother dear, are you sound asleep?" At that moment they woke up, and great was their surprise to see the wooden boy had come to life. They admired the boy until the break of day, and then the priest baptized him and named him Wooden Peter. When he came to be 3 days old, he asked if he could go out and find himself a friend to play with. "Hey, do you know if there's someone who makes swords in this town?" "Of course there is." So the boy went back into the house. "Father, please could you give me 8 florins? You can have whatever you need." "All I need is 8 florins." And off he went to the sword maker. "Good day to you, good sword maker. Let me have for 8 florins the sword that you first made. That's the one for me." So the sword maker went to the swords and sorted until he found an old rusty sword and a sheath to go with it. Peter took the sword, strapped it on, and it looked like the sword had been made especially for him. "Now, here's your 8 florins, for even your first sword has to be paid for." Next day there was a huge mob of people in the town. As they were moving towards the fair, they heard that there were 2 oxen tethered together with a golden chain. Whoever could cut the chain in 2 could take the oxen as his own. So Wooden Peter stepped up to say, "If you'll permit me, I'll cut the chain." So then Peter set to, and he cut that golden chain with a swish and a swoosh that could be heard across the country, far and near. Up went the tails of the 2 oxen, and they didn't stop trotting until they reached the stable. The owner of the oxen said, "Well, Wooden Peter, off with you home to feed the oxen, but you should know that all they eat is glowing embers." Peter set fire to 12 bundles of wood. When they were aflame, he took the water pail and filled it with glowing embers. The 2 oxen ate them all up, and one of them went off to where the sun rises, one to where the sun sets. So Peter said, "Now, Father, let me show you something." He tapped the corner of the gate with his fingers in 2 places, and from one of them good wine gushed out, and from the other good brandy. "Now, Father, everyone can drink to their heart's content. Do you see that wheelbarrow?" "I do indeed, son." "And that millstone?" "Yes, I see it." "Now, when the barrow stands in front of the door and the millstone jumps into it of its own accord, the wine will turn to water and the brandy to deep red blood, and then you'll know that I am dead. And then, if you want to find me, sit into that wheelbarrow and I'll take you to where I am. Now, I have to go off to see the world and try my fortune." After that, Wooden Peter set off across 7 lands and 7 seas until he came to a town in which there lived a king. "Good day to you, your good majesty." "Welcome you are. And what sort of journey are you on?" "I set off to be of service, to try my fortune." "And how much would you require for a year?" "Nothing at all, only what I eat and what I drink." So Peter stayed in the town, working as a carpenter. He was so clever with his hands that the old king took a liking to him. Now the king had a daughter who fell so in love with Wooden Peter that she thought she would die if she wasn't allowed to marry him. "Well then," said the king, "I won't have you dying on me, so I'll let you give him your hand and be his wife. I'll announce a great wedding feast and you'll live as husband and wife." One day the king received a letter telling him to gather together everyone in the land to go off to fight in the war. When the king saw this, he began to weep. "Now, good Father Majesty, do not weep, for I'll go alone to the war." "My son, what can you do alone? You'll be like a gnat against a bison." But Wooden Peter went off, and he was wielding his sword so fiercely that he beat them one and all. But then he stumbled, and that's how they defeated him. As quickly as they could, they buried him in the ground. In the morning, as the light was dawning, the barrow went to the door. The millstone jumped into it of its own accord. The wine turned to water, and the brandy to deep red blood. So the farmer got into the barrow and went to where Peter had been cut down. He searched for him high and low, but to no avail. Then he saw the two oxen coming. The two oxen began to turn the soil with their horns until they uncovered Peter, but there was no sign of life in him. And so one ox put him back together again, and the other put his soul back into him. And Wooden Peter awoke. I slept so well." "You'd have slept forever if it hadn't been for us," said the oxen. They went home, and the king called the whole court together and crowned Wooden Peter king. And he and his queen lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. How I Passed My Childhood. Now, when I was born and all of 6 weeks old, out I went into the street on a hot summer's day, and I met a true old friend of mine, who was a bottle ahead of me and tipsy with it. So we made a pair of oxen out of mud, a cart and sacks to load onto the cart to take them off to the mill and grind them. And off we went. Now, in those days there was a water mill to do the milling, but it wasn't there. The miller was strolling up and down on the water, and so we asked him to call up the mill, and he waved for it and shouted until up it came and we could start to mill away. Now, the miller man didn't have a scoop, so he pulled off my head and used that as a scoop. So when we were finished and off I went on my way home, who did I meet but a shower of women and young ones who started to laugh at me. "What are you laughing at?" says I. "Ah, you don't have a head," says they. And that's how I knew I'd left my head behind in the mill. Back I went, put the head onto my neck, and off for home again. But the women and the young ones were laughing at me again. "Now what are you laughing at?" says I. "Isn't your nose at the back of your head?" says they. So I gave my head a good twist to set it right and off for home again. Now that's when I remembered that I'd stuck my whip into the ground behind the mill pond. Back I went, but when I got there, what did I see but that a great big tree had shot up from it and my old whip was up at the top. So up and up I climbed, and there at the top, what did I find but a hawk chasing a whole cloud of little birds, trying to catch them any way at all. Straight away the little birds, one and all, flew right up my sleeves, into my shirt, and right up my legs, into my breeches. Quick as a flash I tied up my sleeves and breeches, and wasn't I happy that I'd caught so many birds. Yes, indeed. And all these birds in my shirt and breeches started off chirping and tweeting, and all of them giving off in their own language, until up they flew with me and carried me off far, far away. I saw the women washing and scrubbing down on the edge of the sea. They looked up and shouted out, "Look at that big bird!" But I thought I heard them say, "Loosen your shirt!" So that's what I did, and out flew the birds and down I plopped into the sea. I made such a big splash that I emptied out all the water and the fishes were all left around me. So I gathered up a fine lot of them. I didn't waste any more time there because I was far from home. So I set off back through Hotland. Now Hotland is a strange country indeed, where they don't build their houses on the ground, but up in the air at the height of a man. So they need ladders to get in. The people in Hotland are all big and tall, and everything is big. Even the church was so big that there were 4 soldiers in there on a horseback, and when the priest chanted, "The Lord be with you," one of the soldiers spurred his horse and off he went, and he intoned it to the second soldier to the third to the fourth, and he sang it to the respondent. So long was the Mass that the congregation could have done with a good breakfast, but that was no problem at all, since the altar was made of ham and the candles were sausages. And just as big and tall was the steeple of the church. When 2 carpenters were building it, they dropped their hatchets, and by the time one of them fell to the earth, it had rotted away. And when the second was in the air, a lark nested in it, and before it reached the ground, it had laid its eggs and raised its chicks. The bell was so large, the only way they could get it into the belfry was to carry it up when it was a baby and let it grow up there. It was hotter than hot there, so hot that all they did was slaughter a pig, put it in a pan and put the pan out of the window, and straight away they had roast pork. But I didn't waste too much time there either. I'd had enough and continued on my way home. That's how I got to Coldland. It was so cold there that the white of an egg would freeze so brightly that you could read a newspaper by its light. You couldn't speak there unless you could read, because when a man said a word, it straight away froze in front of him and the other had to read it. But I didn't waste too much time in Coldland. On I went, on my way home. By the end, I was getting so fed up with the journey that I stuck my whip into the earth and climbed up to the heavens. And there was my grandmother. "The best of the day to you, Grandma. Do you have some bread and jam for me?" "Oh dear, son," says she, "up here we don't really eat." "You don't? Then how do I get down from here quickly?" Then an old man arrived and I told him as well that I wanted to get back down because there was no bread and jam to be had here at all. The old man remembered that they had a chest of bran and we twisted a rope out of that. I could lower myself down. And as true as I'm here, we plaited it fine enough, but a mouse somehow got into it, and when I was lowering myself back down, that little mouse bit right through the rope, and I plopped down into the ground. I thought I was in the old town somewhere near the church, but I wasn't. I was at the edge of the new town, and I was well and truly drilled into the earth, so I shouted out for them to dig me out, but no one came. So I had to go home for a spade and dig myself out. And that's all I remember of my own younger days and how I passed them. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Lad Who Watched Over the Rabbits. Once upon a time, very long ago, and far away, there lived a king, and the king had a daughter. so beautiful that even the painters could not paint her beauty. Now there came a time for her to take a husband, and the king said that he would give her in marriage to the man who could catch the apple she threw among them. So they came together, the princes and the dukes, the counts and the gypsy lads, to catch the apple. But try as they would, not one of them succeeded. But one day who should turn up but a village lad? Once again the princess flung the apple, and the lad caught it as if it had been thrown straight to him. But the king was not overjoyed at this, that a come-and-go-as-he-pleases lad was to be his son-in-law. Well then, young fellow, I don't know what kind of lad you are to catch the apple, but there's another trial in store for you. I have rabbits aplenty, and you have to watch over them. If you can watch them carefully, well and good, but if you can't, then it's off with your head. Now the lad was downcast to hear that he had to watch over the rabbits, for never before had he been a watcher of rabbits. And all of a sudden, an old woman appeared. She said, "Don't be downcast, young fellow. I shall give you a whistle, and when you go off to the meadow, all you have to do is blow it, and you'll see how useful it will be." Then they let the rabbits out, and they ran off in 1,000 directions. The lad blew his whistle, and the rabbits lined up like soldiers on parade. The king looked out and wondered what kind of lad could keep the rabbits in devilish good order. So the king said to his daughter, "Listen, daughter dear, dress yourself up as a poor young woman and take a satchel with you to the meadow and ask the lad for a rabbit, so that in the evening when he brings them home, there'll be one rabbit missing." So the princess dressed herself up in the clothes of a poor young woman, put a satchel under her arm, and went out to the meadow. "Good day to you, good rabbit herd. God save you. What brings you here, young lady?" "I'm not a lady. I'm just a poor young girl. I came to see if you could give me a rabbit." "Of course I can," he said, "if your highness will give me a kiss." "I'm not a princess," said she. And she was really fierce in denying it because she didn't want the lad to know who she was. But he knew which way the wind was blowing. "Well, just one kiss and I'll give you a rabbit." So the princess thought for a moment to kiss or not to kiss, but in the end, she gave him a kiss. Right away the lad took hold of a rabbit and put it in the satchel for her. So she set off home. But she hadn't got halfway home when the lad blew the whistle again, and the rabbit jumped out of the satchel and scampered back to him. The princess got home, and the king said to her, "Well, did you get a rabbit?" She looked in the satchel and, sure enough, there was nothing in it at all. So she said to her father, "I tried and I asked, but he didn't give me a rabbit," because she was ashamed to say that she had given him a kiss. So the king said, "Never mind, I'll try." So the king dressed up as a poor country lad and took a satchel, and off he went on a donkey to the meadow where the village lad was to be found. When he got there, he said, "God save you, young fellow. How goes it with you?" "Well enough," said the lad. "I have the rabbits to watch over. Have pity on me, young fellow, and give me a rabbit, for I'm as poor can be, and sick, and I need the meat of a rabbit to give me strength." "Willingly," said the lad, "if you kiss the tail of your donkey." So the king thought for a moment, and in the end he kissed the tail of the donkey. Well then, the lad gave him a rabbit. The king took the satchel under his arm and sat astride the donkey. But he hadn't got halfway home when the lad blew that whistle of his, and the rabbit jumped out of the satchel and left it as empty as the day is long. The king got home, opened the satchel, and saw not a rabbit there at all. The princess asked him, "Father dear, Did you bring a rabbit? Of course I didn't bring one. He wouldn't give me one. Evening came, and the king looked out of the window to see how the lad had lined up the rabbits to come home. Like soldiers on parade, in they came, and all of them present and correct. Well done, young fellow, said the king. You've done a very good job. You've passed the test. Now there's one more for you, and if you pass that too, then you'll have my daughter as your wife. Now I want you to tell me as many lies as will fit in a sack. So the lad began to think about what lies he could tell. All the king's councillors sat around in a circle with the lad in the middle, and he started to tell lies. Well, he lied and lied about anything and everything that came into his head. But the king called out, "The sack's not full yet. Carry on with your lying." So he carried on. Well, you know, when I was looking after the rabbits, the princess came to me and asked for a rabbit and gave me a kiss in return. Well, didn't the princess grow as red in the face as a rose in bloom? She couldn't get over her shame. And after that, said the lad, the king himself came, and I told him to kiss the donkeys. It's full, shouted the king. You don't have to say another word. A big sack full of lies. So the lad didn't say another word. And that's how the king gave his daughter to the lad, who watched over the rabbits. Together they lived happily and peacefully. And when the king died, the lad became king. His kingdom was so blessed that it's a pity he isn't still living today. And that's the end of my story. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Golden Calf. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen. And they had a handsome, strong son and a beautiful daughter. One day the king called his children. "Dear son, it's time for you to go out, find a maiden, and get married. I'm getting old, and you should take over the burdens and problems of the land from me, and you, my daughter, should choose someone whom you would be willing to marry." "Father, I do not need anyone. There is not a maiden in this land who was born for me," the daughter continued. "I don't want to get married, father dear. There is no prince in this land for me." The king became very angry. "Get out of here, both of you. I don't want to see you if you are so picky and choosy." So the prince and the princess set out to see the world. As they were walking across the hills, they walked and walked until they became very tired. They rested underneath a tree, and they soon fell fast asleep. When the girl awoke, she called her brother. "I had a dream, brother. Do you know what I saw?" "What did you see? Tell me." "In my dream, I saw that this tree has magical powers. If you pick a leaf and touch it to the forehead of a sick man, that man will be healed right there and then. And not far from here flows a stream, and even if that man is half dead, he will be cured if he drinks from the water. Let's give it a try." They collected a bunch of leaves and filled their sacks with them. The girl filled her canteen with water, and they continued on their journey. They were walking and walking until they reached another land where everyone was dressed in black. "Good woman, what's the reason for mourning in this land?" "My dear son, the prince is so ill that no one can cure him." Our prince said to his sister, "Let's go and cure him." So they both dressed as doctors and went to see the king. The king was only too pleased to let them in. The princess walked up to the prince and placed some leaves on his forehead. And at that very moment, the prince looked up, their eyes met, and they smiled at each other. The brother of the princess stepped up to the bed and gave the prince a few sips of the healing water. The sick prince sat up in an instant, and he was 100 times healthier than ever before. "I'm not going to let you go, whoever you are. You will be my wife." The brother told his sister, "Well, sister, now you've found your true love. It's time for me to walk on until I find mine." And with that, he continued on his journey. And at one point along the way, he heard the sound of drums. The drummers were announcing that the princess would marry the man who found what mark she had under her arm. There were dozens and dozens of candidates who came to try their luck, but none of them had any success. As he was walking around in the town, thinking hard about the riddle, a blacksmith looked out of his window and called to the young man, "Where are you going and why? I heard the drums and the announcement, and I am supposed to guess what mark the princess has under her arm." "Well, that's easy. I have a lot of gold. I could use that to make a golden calf. Somebody could curl up inside that calf, and we can take the calf to market. The princess will see the golden calf and will buy it, and the person inside the calf will find out what mark she has under her arm." The prince said, "What if that person were me?" "Well, all right, we can agree on that." In the morning, the prince climbed inside the golden calf, and they transported it right to the middle of the marketplace. It wasn't long before the king and the princess came walking by. Father dear, please buy this one for me. It would look so beautiful in the palace." And she kept on pleading until her father bought the golden calf for his daughter. He told his men to place the golden calf into his daughter's room. Evening came, and the princess undressed and went to bed. When the prince was convinced that she was asleep, he opened the little door, climbed out, slowly walked to her bed, and peeked under her left arm. And suddenly he saw what was there: the sun, the moon, and the stars. He laughed out loud, but he woke the princess up. When she saw the stranger in her room, she let out a scream. But the prince was not afraid, and he spoke to the princess. "Stop screaming, lest they find out that I'm here with you." The two of them started talking. They agreed that she would have the calf taken back to the blacksmith. And so it happened. In the morning, her father came in. "Oh, father dear, I accidentally broke off one of its ears. Let's have it taken back to the blacksmith so he can place it back." They took back the golden calf, the blacksmith opened the side door, and the prince climbed out. That afternoon, the prince went to see the king. "Your Majesty, please give me 3 days to think, and I'll find out the truth." And he pretended to think long and hard. Finally, the 3rd day came, and the princess could hardly wait. The king spoke. "So, did you find out?" "Well, Your Majesty, she's wearing the sun, the moon, and the stars under her arm." "Well, by golly, you're right. You've solved the riddle. You can have my daughter and my kingdom." And they had a fabulous wedding with plenty of food and drink for everyone. Of course, they invited the prince's sister and her husband, the other prince, and they did not forget about their parents either. Everyone was happy. The wedding and the party lasted for a whole week, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. Martin and the Cursed Princess. Once upon a time, there was a poor man who had 3 sons. The youngest son's name was Martin. When the boys grew up, their father turned to them and said, "Well, boys, you've had enough to eat at home, and now you're old enough and strong enough to work. 1 year from now, I want you each to return home with a suit of clothes. Off you go, and may God bless you all." The boys did as they were told and they started their journey. After a while, they reached a huge old tree. At this point, the road forked into 3 directions. The boys said goodbye to each other, and each of them started walking down a different path. As Martin walked along, he reached a forest. A huge, warty frog was approaching him and spoke to Martin. "I know you're looking for a job. Come on, work for me, and you won't be sorry. All you have to do is chop and saw some wood. Plus put me to bed in the evenings and raise me out of bed in the mornings. Well, what do you say? I'm your man. Wherever I have to work, it's all the same." So he shook the frog's hand and stayed. A whole year passed by. The frog was not a bad employer at all. On the last day it said, "Well, Martin, you've done a good job. Your brothers are taking their new clothes home. But never mind, just go into the pantry and pick whatever you like." Martin selected a nice suit of clothes and started on his return journey homewards. At the old tree, he met his brothers again. "Well, who employed you, Martin?" But as soon as Martin told that he was employed by a frog, the boys nearly fell over laughing. But when they saw his new suit of clothes, they all stopped laughing. They grew yellow with envy. After they got home, they stayed home for a while, but when spring came, their father once again spoke to them. "Well, boys, it's time for you to be working again. But this time tell your masters to pay you with wine." The boys did as they were told. When they got to the tree, they said goodbye again, and each went on his way. The frog was already there in the forest. "Come and work for me, Martin. Your job will be as easy as it was the last time." Martin was already used to the frog, and he didn't mind working at all. When the new year was up, the frog told him, "Hey, Martin, your brothers are already busy carrying their wine home. Never mind anything. Go, find a bottle and walk down into the cellar. Fill it up with the wine you like the best." So the year went by and the boys met once again at the crossroads. Both brothers were rolling a sizable barrel as they went. When they spotted Martin, they couldn't help laughing at him. "Well, that frog master of yours is not a generous employer. All he ever gave you was this miserable little bottle." Martin didn't say anything. He rolled out the largest barrel and poured the wine into it. "Maybe a smaller barrel will be more appropriate," they mocked at him. But it didn't last for long, because when they saw that the bottle was simply not running out of wine, they were so astonished that their eyes bulged out. Their amazement grew when they tasted it. They rested at home for a while, but then their father sent them off to work again. "Now you have clothes and you have wine of your own, and you are ready to get married. But you have to find a wife." The boys did like before, and when they got to the fork in the road, they said goodbye to each other once again. Martin went to see his frog, and the 2 elder brothers went their own way, whatever it was. The frog told Martin, "Well, Martin, this time it's not going to be as easy as before. This time you will have to chop and stack up 3 times as much wood as last year." When the year was over, the frog told Martin, "You've done a good job again, but now you have to be very careful. Gather up my bed linen and take it to the top of that wood stack. Then carry me up and place me on the top of the stack." Martin did as he was told and finally placed the frog on top of the pile of wood. Then he heard the frog call down from the top of the wood, "All right, now go, find a broom, then set the wood stack on fire, and as soon as the wood catches fire, you will see frogs leaping towards the fire from all sides. You must sweep all of them up into the fire, but beware, don't let any of them get away, because that would mean great trouble." Martin begged the frog to come down from the top of the pile, but the frog didn't listen. In the end, he had no choice. He had to set fire to the stack of wood. There was a lot of panic and commotion. There were so many frogs, Martin could hardly sweep them all onto the fire. By nightfall, the fire burned down. The frogs were all lost, including Martin's frog master. Martin was very, very sad. He was still full of sorrow when he fell asleep. The next morning, when he opened his eyes, he saw a beautiful maiden standing next to his bed. "Martin, thank you for saving me. I had to live as a frog with all my household until an honest lad came along and did everything as I told him. But now you have removed the curse." Martin's heart beat loudly when he saw her. The princess jumped into his arms and said, "Your brothers are going home with their wives, but don't you worry. Go down to the courtyard and bring the horses to the best carriage. By the time they get home, we'll be there before them." And so it happened. There was great astonishment and a lot of envy. But Martin was a good brother. He gave each of his brothers 3 sacks full of gold. Then he married the princess and went off to rule as a king. Maybe he could have found himself a better job, but he had no reason to complain, did he now?